Chapter 19, A King's Treasure. "You've guessed the mystery?" Bess asked, astounded. "Oh, no," Nancy answered, "but I think I know what the clue of the angel birds means. I believe that Nikio Sakamaki was telling his grandson to fly over the estate." As Kiyaka strolled off towards the station wagon, Nancy quickly explained to her friends, "If we swoop down low over the Golden Pavilion, I'm sure that we will find either another clue or perhaps the answer to the riddle." "It sounds reasonable," Bess remarked. "But what are you going to swoop down in?" George answered, "A plane, of course, silly." Nancy was thoughtful for several moments, then suggested a plan. "I think I should return in secret to Kaluakua, perhaps with Ned, and see what we can find out. Suppose one of you phone there and say that the group has postponed their return until tomorrow morning. The Chatleys and their friends will assume that this includes Ned and me. In the meantime, we'll do some quiet sleuthing." Ned was enthusiastic about the idea. He was eager to start at once, but Nancy reminded him that it would be far better to cruise slowly over the Golden Pavilion in a helicopter than to fly over it in a plane. They would have to make arrangements to charter one. "Do you think Kiyaka could be trusted to help us?" Ned asked Nancy. "He probably knows some helicopter pilots." Nancy thought that this was a good suggestion, but before taking up the matter with Kiyaka, she went on to tell the others more of her plan. "After we get to Honolulu, Ned and I will stay with the Armstrongs. If anything comes up, phone me there, and I'll call you at the Volcano House." Hannah was concerned about Nancy's undertaking this bit of detective work and made Nancy and Ned promise that they would be extremely careful. At that moment, Kiyaka walked back to the group, and Nancy asked about helicopter service to Oahu. The Hawaiian smiled. "I know just the man to take you," he said. "We'll drive back to park headquarters, and I will phone him for you." When they reached the building, Kiyaka went inside and was gone so long that Nancy began to feel discouraged about the project. But presently the guide appeared, a broad grin on his face. "Everything is arranged," he announced. "Ken Brown will be waiting with his helicopter at 4 o'clock at the Hilo airport." "Thank you very much," said Nancy, then suggested that they all return to the Volcano House for luncheon and make arrangements for the others to spend the night there. At 3 o'clock, Nancy and Ned drove off with Kiyaka. When they reached the Hilo airport, he introduced them to Ken Brown. The pilot was a tall, slender mainlander with blonde hair and flashing blue eyes. "A secret mission, eh?" he asked, grinning. "Sounds good. Climb in." Nancy and Ned shook hands with Kiyaka, thanked him again for all his help, and wished him well. Then they climbed aboard. The great rotors began to whirl, and in a short time the helicopter was airborne. As they neared the tip of Oahu, Ned told the pilot exactly where Kaluakua was located. "Suppose we go past it first and then decide from which angle to approach the pavilion," Ken suggested. "Good idea," Ned replied. "We can see if anyone is out in the gardens." "Yes," Nancy agreed. "We'd prefer that nobody realize we're purposely flying over the estate." Ken kept to the shoreline. As they came opposite the Golden Pavilion, Nancy cried out, "Ned, look! I never noticed that the flower bed down there is in the shape of a plumeria blossom. Also, one petal is a little longer than the others. It points directly to the secret doorway under the pavilion." No one was visible on the grounds, and in a moment Nancy asked the pilot to turn round and this time fly as low as possible over the Golden Pavilion. He did so, and as he came back, Nancy and Ned watched intently. From the air, the golden roof, in the form of a plumeria flower, shone brilliantly in the sunlight. "I didn't see anything unusual, did you?" Ned asked, as Ken sped on. "No, I didn't," Nancy replied. "Ken, could you fly a little lower and a little slower?" The young pilot grinned. "Anything to please," he called back. This time, when Ken went over the golden pavilion, it seemed as if he was only a few feet from it, and went so slowly that Nancy and Ned were able to give the flower roof a close scrutiny. "Ned!" Nancy cried excitedly. "I see it!" "See what?" he asked, puzzled. "That symbol right in the center of the flower," Nancy explained excitedly. "Oh, Ken, please fly over it once more." As the helicopter made a wide sweep and came back over the roof of the golden pavilion, Nancy and Ned gazed intently at the symbol which Nancy had spotted. Quickly, she sketched the symbol in her notepad, then began rifling the pages of the book. "Have you seen enough?" Ken called back. "I just saw somebody come out of the house. The folks in there may become suspicious." "I've seen enough," Nancy replied. "Please take us to the airport." She continued to look through the notebook until she came to a certain page. On it were a number of Polynesian symbols and their translations. "I've been collecting these," she told Ned. "From books?" he inquired. Nancy said that she had copied them from various places, objects in the museum, pieces of furniture, and advertisements. "Oh, Ned!" she suddenly exclaimed excitedly. "Here it is." She pointed to one of the symbols, comparing it with the drawing she had just made. "It matches, and it means king." "Good sleuthing," Ned commented. "But where do we go from here?" "I believe," said Nancy, her eyes sparkling, "that some treasure belonging to an ancient Hawaiian king is hidden at the center of the golden plumeria." "If you're right," said Ned, "you're about to solve one of the most intriguing mysteries in your career." Nancy admitted that she could hardly wait to investigate the roof of the pavilion. By the time they had landed and taken a taxi to the Armstrongs' home, she had formulated a plan of action. "Tonight you and I will go secretly to the golden pavilion with a ladder, Ned. You're to have the honor of uncovering the treasure. I'll protect you by being a dancing ghost in the moonlight." Ned's brow wrinkled. "I don't get it." Nancy said that what she hoped to do was scare away anyone in the house or on the grounds who might see the ghost, and so leave Ned free to carry on his work. "The person may not run away, of course, but I hope at least he won't come near." Ned laughed softly. "Light begins to dawn. You're going to pretend to be that ghost-like hula dancer? The one who was supposed to frighten people away?" "Exactly, Ned. Of course, I may run into trouble if she, too, happens to come around, or if she's staying at Kaluakua. But we'll have to take that chance. Whatever happens, I'll try to give you plenty of time to find the treasure." Ned remarked that it would not be safe to leave the ladder against the building once he was on the roof. Anyone approaching the pavilion would know at once that someone was up there. "I'll hide the ladder while you're working," Nancy promised. Ned grinned. "You'd better not let anything go wrong and leave me stranded up on that roof," he warned. By this time, the taxi had reached the Armstrongs' home. Mrs. Armstrong opened the door. "Oh, I'm so glad to see you," she cried out. "Hannah Gruen telephoned that you were coming. When I heard something of your plan, I began to worry, but now that you're here safe, I guess everything is all right." She showed Nancy and Ned to rooms which they would occupy for the night, then suggested that they all meet in the garden for cool drinks of lemonade. "Would you mind," Nancy asked, "if we stay indoors? I don't want anyone to know we're here." "Why, certainly, dear," Mrs. Armstrong said. "We'll talk in the living room." Mr. Armstrong had been out, but had returned by the time Nancy and Ned had freshened up. The older couple listened intently as Nancy unfolded her plan. "And now," she asked at the conclusion, "do you know where I can find a lightweight folding ladder that could be put inside your car, Mr. Armstrong?" The man thought for a moment, then said he remembered their carpenter had one. He would phone and find out if they might borrow it. While he was gone, Nancy inquired if Mrs. Armstrong had a white muumuu and some white veils which she might borrow. "Come upstairs with me," her hostess said. "I think we can locate something. Mrs. Armstrong rummaged through a bureau drawer, pulling out everything that was white. Among the articles were 2 white scarves. "And here is a white muumuu," she said delightedly. "We'll press these things in a jiffy, and you'll be all set for your part as a hula ghost dancer." When she and Nancy returned downstairs, Mr. Armstrong said, "I have permission for you to borrow the ladder. I'll run over and get it now." "That's wonderful," said Nancy. "And I have my costume." She insisted upon pressing the muumuu and scarves herself, while Mrs. Armstrong sat by in the laundry room and chatted with her. Ned, meanwhile, had found a record player and was enjoying a variety of Hawaiian tunes. Dinner was served indoors, so that no prying eyes would see Nancy and Ned. Conversation was both jolly and serious. As the time neared for Nancy and Ned to leave, the youth filled his 2 jacket pockets with several small tools to help prise up the center of the golden flower roof. Mr. Armstrong brought the car to the door, and the couple slipped into it. Good luck, said Mr. and Mrs. Armstrong in a low tone. On the way to Kaluakua, Nancy and Ned discussed the possibility of entering the grounds secretly. That's easy, said Ned. I'll park down beyond the gardens in a grove of trees I've seen. There's a hidden path through it to the beach. We can come up alongside the bushes from the beach and then turn in towards the pavilion. Good, Nancy approved. After Ned had parked the car, she said, I'll follow you. The two set out. Ned carried the ladder. Over Nancy's arm hung the muumuu and scarves. Ned's directions proved to be correct, and after a considerable walk, they arrived in a wooden garden near the golden pavilion. The ladder was set against the side of the building, which was in shadow, and Ned scrambled nimbly up. When he reached the roof, he lay flat and crawled to the center. In the meantime, Nancy had folded the ladder and dragged it to a place of hiding among the bushes. She looked round and listened. There was no sound, but far down the beach she could see a moving light. I'd better get into this costume, she told herself. Someone may be coming here. Hurriedly, she slipped the muumuu over her head, removed her shoes and stockings, then draped the two scarves gracefully round her head and shoulders in such a way that she could cover her face if necessary. Stepping out from the shadows, she noticed that the moving light was a little closer. Her heart pounding, she began to hum a Hawaiian melody and dance the hula. As she swayed and raised her arms from side to side, the young sleuth kept wondering how Ned was making out. In playing her part of the ghost dancer, she dared not look up nor wander far away from the pavilion. Suddenly, the moving light on the beach went out. Had the person carrying it spotted her? Had he been frightened by the apparition, or was he stealthily moving towards her? For a moment, Nancy felt like running, but her courage returned. I mustn't desert Ned, she commanded herself. She continued to dance over the grass, up the steps of the pavilion, and across the floor. She glided down the steps of the other side. Still, no one came to disturb her. Surely Ned will be ready in a minute, Nancy thought. A second later, she was startled by a voice which seemed to hiss at her from only a short distance away. At first, she thought it was Ned. Then she detected the figure of a man emerging from among the bushes. Nancy's heart missed a beat, but she continued her acting, holding one of the scarves across her face. Keep on dancing while I talk, the stranger ordered. And for 10 minutes after I leave. Kiabu is afraid of you, and he won't come while you're here. Nancy was elated. Her ruse was working. The man sat down on the ground and began strumming his fingers on the edge of the pavilion steps. Suddenly, he raised his 2 forefingers and touched them together. Nancy almost cried aloud, but she kept on dancing as she said to herself, This man must be Jim O'Keefe. In a few moments, he began to speak again. It's a good thing you showed up tonight, Millie, the man said. If you decided to Welsh on us, your life and that of your double-crossing husband wouldn't have lasted long. Nancy pretended to shiver, and the man gave a low, sardonic laugh. Now listen. Tomorrow night you're to repeat this dance. Nancy Drew and the rest of her gang put off returning until tomorrow. They'll come out to watch you, and then we'll nab 'em all. You'll see. O'Keefe went on to say that Nancy's group would be taken to a mountain cabin, tied up, and left to starve. Sakamaki will come next, the man said harshly. In the meantime, we'll all clear out but the grandchildren. He guffawed sardonically. We'll leave them to get control of the estate for us. Nancy, as Millie, made no reply. She continued to dance. O'Keefe got up, laughed softly, and went off towards the house. I guess we got here just in time, Nancy told herself. When the 10 minutes were up, Ned came to the edge of the roof. I heard everything. Let's get out of here as fast as possible. Then he added jubilantly, I have the king's treasure. Nancy rushed off to get the ladder, set it in place, and Ned hurried down the rungs. Over his arm, he was carrying a long, vari-colored cape made of birds' feathers. Why, this is one of those ceremonial capes made from the extinct Oo bird, Nancy exclaimed softly. A museum piece. It sure was well protected, Ned commented. I had to prise up a lot of insulation. That's what took me so long. He threw the cape over his shoulders and strutted about. It's simply gorgeous, Nancy whispered. At this instant, the couple heard footsteps. Nancy and Ned began to run. Nancy had no time to put on her shoes and stockings, and Ned found it impossible to carry the ladder. He dropped it among some bushes, and the two sped off. But they were too late. The next instant, they were surrounded by 4 men. Ned managed to knock out one of the men, but the odds were against the couple. The ancient cape was taken away from Ned, and he and Nancy were bound and gagged. 2 of the captors dragged their prisoners back to the Golden Pavilion, opened the secret panel in the foundation, and roughly pushed them inside. The door was slammed shut. End of chapter 19.